Hi quilters. Today I'm going to do a little lesson on string piecing and strip piecing. Now those are often used interchangeably, but basically strip piecing means that you are using strips that are all of the same width. And it's used in quilts like an Irish chain, where you are going to want all of the pieces to be the same width. So that's strip piecing. In string piecing is a lot more flexible. In this you can see that my strips range from this wide down to quite narrow, this wide. So that is string piecing. Okay, and I am going to show you the techniques that you can use for this kind of piecing. There are several. First of all, you can take your pieces, you can take your strings, and you can just sew them together. You would put the first two facing each other, right sides together. Sew a 1/4 inch, flip this one, and keep adding side to side like this until you get the length piece. You would pick strings, strips or strings, the length that you want it to be this way. You know how long you want it to be this way, and you keep adding until you get there. These do all look about the same. Here's one that's a little narrower. Here's one that's a little wider. So that would be string piecing, and you would just sew them together. I don't like to do it that way because it can get a little wonky. That way it can start to curve. You can get off the line that you want to sew on, and it can start to look not as straight and even as I might like. Now, there's a form of string piecing where you're wonky on purpose, where you want your lines to be crooked. And if you do that, you place your pieces right sides together and you sew. I don't know if you can see it on which side, neither side is very good, but you sew a crooked line, and then you would put down your ruler, because you don't want a crooked seam in the back. You just want your line to be crooked. So you would put your ruler a 1/4 inch mark on the seam, and you would just cut that. So now you can see it has a 1/4 inch seam, but it's coming in. And then for this one, I laid this down crooked, and I sewed my seam here, and I'd put this on here, and I would cut that. You don't want one piece of your seam bigger than the other. You don't want wonky on the back, but you might want wonky on the front, and you can just keep going. You can do it more extreme than that. And for some designs, especially modern designs, that's a really legitimate way to do it. If you're going for, as I was in this block, nice, straight, even, this is going to be cut into triangles, half square. This is a way of making half square triangles, same as anyway. So what you do here is you stitch onto paper. And the best way to do that is to use paper that's called newsprint. If you are in my library group, I have a thick ream of newsprint, and you are welcome to take as many sheets as you need. It's a lifetime and more supply for me. So what you do is first you lay down across the center. Well, I'm going to show you one more thing first. The other way you can do it, if you don't want a paper piece, you don't want to have to rip the paper out after, you can do it on a sheer light cotton. This is a piece of muslin. And so I'm just going to show it on here because it hasn't been stitched yet. So you take your longest piece. This is very long, but it has to go past this point and past this point in order to not show the muslin when you're done. And you place this along the middle, and then you flip it. This is the only one that you have to be careful with. If I have this like this, it's not going to be diagonal, it's going to be a little wonky, which you might want. But if you want a nice straight diagonal like this is the one that you measure, and you can put this down the middle, so these points are in the middle. Or if you want to put something a little off center, that's okay, but you still keep it, this distance is the same as this distance. So I just put a couple of pins in that just to hold it for a minute until I get going, and I don't pin anything else. And this is also what I would do on paper. So it's up to you. What this does is it adds a little thickness to your block. And if that matters to you, you're going to want to do the paper and rip the paper off when you're done. You can see that this, that isn't right, is it? You can see that this extends well beyond it. It doesn't have to. If I wanted to save a little fabric, I could put it much closer to one end like this. But I really, you know who I am. I would get out a ruler and I would measure this distance and this distance to try to get that straight, and then pin it on. Just a couple of pins to hold it in place. Then what you do is you flip it and you look at it from the top, not the back. And you can go in either direction. You take your next piece and you put it face down on this, and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam here. Now the key to this is you have to remember that you want to cover the muslin in a 1/4 inch because that's where you're sewing. So this has to be long enough. You can't put it here because when you flip this, well, maybe you can, but what you want to do, practice, hold it, flip it, make sure it covers your muslin. So sew the 1/4 inch seam. I like to, in order to make sure that I'm not leaving any little tucks or wrinkles, once I've sewed this, I press this one. Have my iron right next to my machine. I press this one. Then you can go this way, or you can keep going that way. Maybe, let me see what would fit on that. Would this fit next? Is that long enough? Maybe, just. I'm not sure. Well, it's going to be in my seam, in my other seam anyway. And I flip that once I've sewed it and press it. So the first one is the one that you want to get right. Get it straight on the diagonal and get this right up against this side or the other side, whichever direction you're going. See, that's not fun because they're the same width. Let me find one that's maybe a different width. Well, what's going on here? I had all different things. How's this? Nothing's working. Anyway, pretend that this is narrower. And we'll put this on. Pretend it's this wide. Put it on. And sew the seam. This you can see is way too short. You can't use that for the next piece. So once you have everything sewed on, like this is for a block I'm making. It's a mess around the edges and I want to use the square. So I just flip it over, go right up to the edge of the paper, and trim it all the way around. And then before I use it in anything else I'm making, I'm going to take off the paper. So you can see it looks Looks like that now around the edges. I'm not going to do the whole thing, but you can get a picture of how that works. The paper is, because it's a very thin, cheap paper, the kind that you used to get in school to when you were going to throw it away, whatever you were doing. You use this cheap, lightweight paper. I do not like to use nice computer paper. It doesn't rip easily. And you set your stitch very short. This was set on my machine at 1.5. Normally we sew at about a 2. Often the machine comes on at 2.4. That is how many millimeters long your stitch is. So I set it way down to 1.5 millimeters. I fold this back and it rips right off. I lift this one up. You can do this while you're watching the Yankees. I suppose you could also do it when you're watching the Phillies. And you turn this back. I give it the fingernail and rip it off. I'm not leaving any paper in the seams because this is cheapo and my seams are my stitches are very short. Okay, well, this is on the diagonal, but you might not want your strings or your strips on the diagonal. You might want them straight. So of course you'd put it down the middle and turn them. I want to show you a project that I made a long time ago, I think 2014. This is a wall hanging. It's about 48 inches by 48 inches. And look at all that string piecing on it. You can really see the narrow and the wide pieces in this. Now I had a lot of leeway because with this being 48 inches square, those are great big points and great big squares in the middle. And you can see that the points were made on the diagonal, but the middle pieces were made on the straight. And then you can also use strip piecing for a piano key border. And in that case, you might do a very long strip piece and then cut it so that you can use a lot of it in your border. Now, you can go mad with strip piecing too. This is a piece I made in 2021, and I made those flying geese, graduated flying geese lines, and then I added on, now this was paper pieced. I actually marked the paper on the lines where I wanted to sew the sun rays. The sun was not on until the end. That was appliqued on a very messy looking mush in the middle where all of those lines came together. But you can see they're different. They are different widths. Some are wider. They all go out to a wider spot. And a few have these little flying geese lines in the strips. Somebody asked me for a sun block. That block was, I believe, 18 by 18. It might have been 16 by 16. So strip piecing is string piecing, strip piecing, very flexible, used in many different quilts, and not hard to do at all, especially if, this is called foundation piecing, whether you put it on paper. That's called paper piecing when you put it on paper, or if you put it on some fabric back like muslin, that's called foundation piecing. Here you rip the paper out, here you leave the muslin in your quilt. It's one very thin extra layer behind that block. These are going to be made into half square triangles, and this is going to make 8 small half square triangles, which is why I kept my strips quite narrow, because there aren't going to be many of these strips on each piece. I have a video of making half square triangles on my YouTube channel. So if you've gotten to this one, you can scoot and look at that one if you need it. Okay, have fun.